Hello, everyone. We would start the webinar fairly shortly. For those of you who have already joined, welcome. And we'll give a few more minutes for some other participants to join. And then we'll get started shortly, maybe in a couple of minutes. Thanks for your patience. Hello, everyone. We would start the webinar in approximately a minute. We are giving a little bit more time for some other participants to join. So just a minute more. Thanks for your patience. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are right now. Welcome to our panel discussion. Our topic for today is sourcing right IT partners. I'm Shubhro Banerjee from Aspire Systems, and I would be the moderator for today's discussion. At the outset, I would like to thank all of you on the phone for taking time off your busy schedules to attend the session today. I sincerely hope that you find it very fruitful. Before we get started, I would like to outline the structure of the discussion for today. We will initially spend approximately 10 minutes on introductions and also setting the context for the discussion. I would then open the floor for discussions, and we expect that to run for about 40 minutes. The final 10 minutes would be reserved for questions and answers. During this discussion, if you have any questions, if you want to throw some questions at our panelists, please feel free to type that in your chat window on the webinar page. During the question and answer session, we'll try and get through as many of those as we can. And if we do run short of time and we are not able to get to your question, we will definitely reach out to you subsequently through emails with our panelists' responses. I'll get down to formal introductions a little later, but at this stage, I would like to take this opportunity to give you a brief about the structure of our panel for today. On our panel today, we have two distinguished gentlemen who, interestingly enough, come from the two different ends of the IT outsourcing spectrum. Bringing in his experience from the IT outsourcing consumer perspective would be Stephen Kaufman, who is the Chief Technology Officer at SGK Inc. And On the counter side, bringing in the perspective of a service provider would be Sriram Gopalakrishnan, who is the Vice President of Operations at Aspire Systems. Both of our panelists have in excess of 10 years of experience in the IT outsourcing spectrum and have worked with varying models and structures. And I'm definitely looking forward to a very enlightening discussion on the topic. So let's kick off this discussion with some brief introductions. I'll start with myself. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Shubhro Banerjee. I'm an account manager with Aspire Systems. I started my association with the IT industry in the year 2000, just around the time when the industry was coming out of the Y2K frenzy. And since then, I have had the opportunity to work at offshore locations, providing outsourced IT support, and also quite a few years at client locations, trying to provide that service to the clients and coordinate that. Since the year 2005 onwards, I have been deputed at client locations, both in the US and in the UK, and I've had the opportunity to lead multiple outsourced IT projects during those years. And for the last 3 years, I have been responsible for managing Aspire's IT outsourcing engagement and partnership with SGK. That brings us to SGK and our first panelist for today's discussion, Stephen Kaufman. Stephen is the Chief Technology Officer at SHOCK. Stephen, at this point, I would request you to provide a brief introduction about yourself and SGK.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Shubhro. As you stated, I work at SGK Inc. We're headquartered here in the Chicago area of the United States. And from a high-level perspective, SHOCK is a $500 million per year company. We have 3,200 employees, and we operate in 17 different countries globally. Our mission is really twofold to kind of explain our business. We typically deal with brands of different types, either in the pharmaceutical space, the consumer product space, or the retail space. And we really have two missions with those brands. One mission is to make the brand desirable, which is a creative endeavor. And our idea is to inspire clients to first try the brand, then to become loyal to the brand, then to be an advocate for the brand, and then eventually just to be a repeat advocate. And so that really is a creative aspect of our work. The second side of our mission is about profitable brands and building profitable brands. And what that means execution. So we're often building artwork files for our customers, trying to help them to get to market in a timely fashion, respond to the competitors, respond to changing consumer desires. For SHOCK, about 70% of our revenue is on the profitability side and about 30% on the desirability side. Personally, I've been with SHOCK for 20 years. I joined in almost exactly 20 years ago in 1994. And we'll get into a little bit more of the details of my work with SHOCK as we go through the conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Stephen. Welcome to our panel discussion for today. We'll move on to our next panelist, Sriram Gopalakrishnan. Sriram is the Vice President of Operations at Aspire Systems. He holds responsibility for the US East and Midwest regions in Aspire. Sriram, I would request you to provide a brief about Aspire and an introduction about yourself.
Thanks, Shubhro, and thanks, Stephen, and thanks to all the participants for this panel discussion. I've been in this industry for the past 20 years and been working with Aspire for the past 3 years. And Aspire, is probably a mid-size organization focusing on the services business. And we are about 1,100 plus employees right now, and we have 3 different locations in India. Chennai, and the northern side is Gurgaon, and in the central part, which is Hyderabad. I come from the US division, and I manage the US East and the Midwest operations, and I also take care of the sales and the account management for these regions. Aspire, as such, it is primarily focused on technology, services providing, and we are, slowly moving towards the domain focus as well. We've been ranked to consistently ranked in the top 25 companies in the Great Place to Work, and which is one of a proud moment that I would say. And then we focus on the cloud and business intelligence and the mobility as our center of excellence. I'm actually started my career in the hardware industry, and I moved towards the software in '96. Been working towards had some hands-on experience at the beginning from the programming and moved towards the organization as it grows. So. And I'm very happy to have this discussion with Stephen to discuss about this identifying the right partnership discussion.
Thank you, Sriram. Welcome to our panel discussion for today. Before we get started with our main discussion, I would like to provide some context behind it. Why are we talking about IT outsourcing? How relevant is it in today's context? Should we really spend as much time on it as we are right now? Well, if you look at the statistics on the screen right now, you would notice that, according to a study that Computer Economics conducted in 2013, more than 55% of small and medium organizations get actively involved in application development outsourcing. And what do I mean when I say small and medium-sized organizations? We are talking about organizations that have less than $20 million of yearly IT budget. When we go towards the larger organizations who actually have more than $1 million budget on IT per year, the percentage actually jumps to 65. So we see more bigger companies getting involved in IT outsourcing. And irrespective of the size of the organization, any organization who is actively involved in IT outsourcing, approximately 35% of their IT budgets are spent on outsourcing itself, which is a significant number when you talk about going across all industry domains and verticals. That does make IT outsourcing a topic of significant importance in today's world. And do we expect the trend to continue? Do we, would this continue to be relevant? Well, if we look at another part of the study by Computer Economics, actually brought out a very significant fact. There are some companies who have actually reduced their budget allocation towards IT outsourcing. Probably some work has come in-house. We look at 17% of the companies who have reduced their budget allocation towards IT outsourcing. But that is more than compensated by 37% of the companies who have actually increased their allocation to IT outsourcing. So the trend is positive, and it is continuing to increase. And what kind of volumes can we expect going forward? Does this trend continue? If we look at another study that was conducted across industry verticals, and it involved 150 CIOs of companies from various different sectors, it reveals that in 2020, IT outsourcing is probably going to grow at around 15% over the numbers we had for 2013. And if we look at how much of that would go towards offshoring, we are looking at about a 10% increase on the offshoring side as well. So, IT outsourcing is relevant as of today, would continue to be in the near future, and probably long term as well. So I guess it's time spent well if we discuss this topic and find our mutual synergies and figure out the best way to operate. And going forward, all organizations need to focus on getting the best returns out of these IT outsourcing engagements, whether companies are already involved in it or they're looking to get into it. The key to that would be identifying the right IT partner to work with. And that really sets the context for our discussion for today. And Stephen, let me come to you first. You started your IT outsourcing involvement, I think, more than 10 years ago. The big question, I think, out in the market right now is there a magic potion that helps you identify the right partner? When you're looking for an IT service provider, are there very specific set of criteria that you would base your selection process on?
Yeah, I'm not sure I could call it a magical formula, but there is, I think, a formula for success, which probably relates not only to IT outsourcing partners, but really other technology partners of various sources. Couple of the criteria that we first would look for, one is the potential partner the right size. Obviously, you don't want to be, what we call a small fish in a very large ocean where you're not being paid attention to. So if the partner has thousands and thousands of employees and thousands of projects, are you going to really get the response that you need if you're a mid-sized company? So that's something that is important to us. I think going beyond that, I think there has to be a certain degree of philosophical alignment. You have to feel like your partner shares the same ethical values, that they are honest, and that they can sustain the relationship. You get a feeling when you're being pitched to in a sales pitch. Sometimes you're just pitched to, and then as soon as you sign on the contract, everybody that you were talking to leaves, and then you get a totally different set of people that may not really have the same desire to service your account that the salesperson has. So you kind of, your radar's up for that kind of thing early on. You kind of figure the organization out, and you want to try to have the vendor commit to keeping some people on through the sales process and the end execution, so you don't wind up, buying from one team and then being serviced by another. I think that the third thing is probably a little harder to get our fingers on right away, but it comes to what additional value that the vendor growing into partner might provide. So even if you have a coding exercise or some business analyst work that you need doing, or project management, that's all good, but can the team actually bring more? Can the team bring creation, ideas, have you look in different directions? And of course it takes time and trust to build that, but I think we would look for those three factors across any potential partner. And
Stephen, how about type or volume of work? In my experience, the type of work being done, the stage of maturity of a product, generally impacts the kind of partner you want to work with. Do you think scope and scale of work plays a big role here as well?
Yeah, I do. I would say, in particular, the operating model of the business entity you're servicing is very important. So there's one model we have here at SGK Inc. would be the ISV model, the independent software vendor, where we've got a subsidiary of SGK that delivers a product to the market. And they have a roadmap, and they have very strict deadlines. And of course, they have their own clients who are asking them to accomplish all these things, and there's a priority matrix that goes with that. So if we were to bring in a offshore development partner on that, we have to get a offshore development partner that kind of get into tune with that profit loss mentality that's in this micro business, right? And you take that and contrast that maybe with something more of an enterprise cost center type engagement, where you still have deadlines and responsibilities, but the cadence is different, and even the metrics and the KPIs and the type of dialogue you have really take on a different tenor. And you quickly kind of wind up on the same team trying to execute in that cost center. And I think those two are very different kinds of engagements. One thing that's been positive for Aspire in our working relationship is that Aspire's been able to actually help us on both sides, right? So we've had an ISV engagement, and we've had several enterprise type engagements, and the teams are structured differently. I said success criteria is different.
Mm-hmm. Sriram, Stephen talked about multiple factors here. He talked about the size of the organization, their flexibility, also the kind of work that is involved. From a service provider's perspective, what do you look for from a client to help you forge the right kind of partnership? Are there specific pointers that tell you, this is the client that you would want to work with long term?
Thanks, Stephen and Subro. This is a very nice question here. One of the key aspects is when you start any engagement initially, you are starting as a vendor, meaning you are not, straight away getting into a partnership, because that has to evolve by itself. And that initial period is kind of a cautious steps that even sometimes, on the client side and as well as the service provider side, they take every steps cautiously, and sometimes, they're being over cautious as well. Because sometimes that is good. Actually, you do over communicate. You do a lot of things to just make sure that other side is comfortable. At the same time, from the client side, what we specifically look for is that, are we just being given this task and then they're not looking at beyond? Meaning this is one of the key, because right now I know I've been coming into this for a specific work that needs to be done, but while I work on it, am I being exposed to provide more suggestions, or even within the same project, are there the ideas that are coming in are being taken in a right way? It is important. It is not just the team who's there is just do what it says. They're also being considered for what value additions that they bring in. I can bring in a lot of value additions, but at the same time I need to see how the reception is, and that is one of the key, meaning how well they are involving us during these interactions is a kind of a weightage, or it's kind of a metrics that we measure internally to see how well we wanted to move forward, open up, and then go from there. And another thing is to make the client comfortable to do this, they also need to have some kind of a trust. Meaning the trust is not going to come on day one, and the trust needs to happen over a period of time. So how can I make the trust happen? So one is over communicate, meaning keep communicating every day. Meaning a lot of times if you do a lot of offshore project, the client doesn't have an experience with the offshore. They started feeling that they're not getting updates every day. Once in a week they get an update. They don't know what's happening and what not, and things like that. So it is essential to make sure that there has been updates and there is a frequent communication, and the transparency is happening from the vendor side. At the same time, the intention from the client side is, are they opening up, meaning to take more feedback and ideas and things. That is one of the key to go towards building a right partnership.
Stephen, a little while earlier you were talking about various criteria that influences your identification of a right service provider. So when you started outsourcing for the first time, how diligently did you follow this criteria? Did you do all the assessment up front, or did you do some a little down the line in the initial phases of engagement? And once you identified the partner, what steps did you take in the initial phases of the engagement to make sure things are really smooth and things are going in the right direction?
Yeah, so I'd like to say that we just sat around, and one day I was at my desk and I thought, well, I'll just decide on an IT outsourcing partner, and I put 6 months of research into it. But really, that's not how it happens. What happens is we service our operations. Our operation comes up with a problem. Typically, the problem needs to be solved yesterday. And so I think we found ourselves in a position of trying to quickly select a partner. And unfortunately, because of that speed, we actually had 2 failures before we found a successful partner. So now in hindsight, I can tell you what I should have been looking for and how I could have avoided a couple failures. But part of it was I had to go through that experience, at least at this time. So it's going back some years. One issue I think is particularly because we work in a major market, Chicago. So if you're in New York, Chicago, LA, Philadelphia, a larger city, we would expect there to be a local presence near us so that we could really dialogue. So now if I was in a rural environment, Idaho or Wyoming or something, I think you have to temper your expectations because you're not going to always have the service provider right by you. But we didn't really have a local presence. We had somebody fly in, had a quick meeting, shot out again, talked to them in a couple weeks. There wasn't a lot of commitment by them to us to really give us a deep dialogue. It was more of, what do you need? Here's the price, and let's get going. It sounded very efficient, but we didn't set the underpinnings for a successful relationship. I think that we didn't have clean interaction with management, so we talked to sales. We didn't really find out about the company, its philosophy, its ownership, what they stood for. We just heard a salesperson telling us that they could execute that kind of project, And so if the salesperson's confident, you might say, oh, well, this sounds great. You really got to do more homework than that. I think you got to really look behind the organization. Then I think a third point might be that if you don't have on-site presence, I'm really big on on-site. I think that part of our success and our ability to build a partnership with Aspire and with other offshore vendors is on-site communication. Somebody that walks the halls with you, starts to know when your business isn't doing well, they kind of know, and they know what's not going well, and they can ask you, hey, is there anything we can do to help? And when things are going well, they're there to celebrate with you. Hey, I heard you guys won such and such a deal, or got a new customer. And that's really what makes that partner start to feel more like part of the team. So again, kind of going back to that, I think once you have a project that you start working on, I think we're going to get into more details of project by project, developing the relationships, defining structural arrangement, a master service agreement is a helpful document, an overarching document which says exactly how you're going to operate together, and then the service level agreement to set your expectations. When I say I need help, how quickly is this vendor going to respond? And then I need to track against that. Did they, in fact, respond as fast as they said they would? And then for each project, I think we have been very strict about building a statement of work around that engagement and saying what's included, and often the most important thing is what's not included, right? It is this and this and this, but it's not this other thing. And that type of communication up front keeps you from falling off track when you get into project execution, because everybody knows here's what the responsibilities are. So I'd say that's part of the initial development is building a document framework around the relationship and setting expectations.
Sure. Sriram, Stephen just talked about the correct governance when you're really starting the engagement, having the right setting the right expectations. So from the service provider's perspective, what do you do to enhance that particular confidence or the movement in the right direction? Are there things outside of the governance that you would do?
I think one of the key aspect here is that when we start any engagement, initially you have the salespeople getting involved and trying to work towards winning the deal. But then once we started realizing the potential in nature, or even if it is for any size of the client, what we need to do is to have a delivery-focused person handling this particular client. Meaning you start with the sales, but then sales will focus more from the hunting perspective. But then once you started building this relationship, it is not more of a hunting there. It is more of a partnership where we need to understand the needs and then appropriately act on it.
Farming.
Yeah, exactly.
Harvesting.
Right. Right. It is not that you keep on bucking the others. That's very key. And then plus the person who needs to be associated needs to understand from how a delivery is going to happen, and then also understanding from the client relationship. So that is very key with respect to starting an engagement. Meaning you started working with a small project, but by the end of that project, and then you shouldn't be starting something on how am I going to now I've done the one project with the client and how am I going to build the partnership. It has to start from the day one, looking at how things are and then making your adjustment accordingly. And then especially the expectations need to be set very clearly. One is there are sometimes we coming in there as a technology expertise, so we are trying to understand the business and the functional expertise. I mean, every organization, if you go to any enterprise or any ISP, they always say that their process is unique, their business function is unique.
Right.
Even though you might say that I have experience outside of the function, it is just making sure that that giving that everyone have different ways to how you operate. So we need to make sure that not only I'm just building just that technology expertise, I'm also going how am I building that business expertise into the team so that they get this confidence.
Yeah.
So that is one of the key aspects.
But in early, it's all about delivery, right? I mean,
right.
you can't. There won't be a second project if you don't deliver the first. And then even the value add stuff doesn't matter initially. It's just did you deliver? And then once you deliver a project or two, then we start talking about the other stuff.
The moment you deliver, then they'll talk about they delivered.
Yeah.
What else they added along with that?
Yeah, that's what gets whispered around the hall.
Yeah.
They delivered.
Right.
Right. So what I'm hearing is, the personnel engaged on the initial assignment is key, and how you transition from your sales position to your delivery organization, and how you maintain continuity is key. But Stephen, is what is involved in the team structuring when you talked about your initial engagement or going further? What kind of role would you want to see on site?
Yeah.
Or what kind of distribution should there be between on site and offshore? Is there kind of a thumb rule that defines how do you structure your team for various engagements?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's probably a little bit more of a chemistry there. So there's a few axes that we would evaluate the staffing of a potential offshore partner. One is going to be, as you mentioned, offshore, onshore, who's near you and who's physically far from you and maybe even 12 hours off your clock, right? So onshore, offshore. Another thing is the role. So I've got project managers, business analysts, typically some developers, very hopefully developers, and then testers, and then maybe a management, above that. So I've got these different roles, and maybe the third axis is you're going to have some experienced members of your team. You can have some people with less experience. Typically, could be at a lower rate, or maybe the less experienced are more often offshore. But you've got this kind of mixture, on, off, what's their role, and experience, non-experience, and you kind of need to build that for each type of task, right? And so, so from the onshore, offshore side, I guess the rule of thumb for us would be about 80% offshore and 20% on. That's kind of where you start from. That's what I kind of consider normal. But we might have something where there's a lot of complex business analytics. Like we've got a project right now where we're dealing with complex equipment called spectrophotometers and color algorithms and ink mixing, and it's very detailed. And so we've got more onshore presence on that. So I think we're probably more like 30% onshore, 70% off, because we've got a lot of business analytics going on. And then I think as that project matures and as those requirements get defined, we're going to see that shift during the life cycle of that one project. Once the majority of the BA work is done, then we're probably going to see it shift back to 80-20, and then even more so maybe as we get into heavy development and testing, maybe it even shifts a little further, and it's 10 onshore and 90 off. And we're kind of used to that. I mean, that's a cadence that we don't want to just lock it down and say, well, always be 80-20. We need SGK's management, as well as you guys, in this case of Aspire, helping us continually figure out what's the right balance for utilization. If we've got good utilization and the project's meeting all its deliverables, that doesn't mean that it's still going to be true next month, right? We're going to stay in tune with it, be looking ahead, and let the onshore-offshore balance evolve with the project.
And Stephen, in your experience, you talked about the state of maturity of the product or the cycle where it currently is in. But does the execution model matter? I mean, what model are we following? Is it a waterfall? Is it an agile? Or the kind of people we are involved with? Is it an enterprise or is it an ISP?
Right.
Do they play a role in structuring as well?
Yeah, definitely. So there's probably some patterns there. As we said a little earlier, the ISV, particularly if it's young, it's going to be very profit motivated and cost sensitive. So when you're cost sensitive, you probably want as high an offshore ratio as you can get to keep your labor costs lower. So somebody managing a startup's software company, kind of like we have buried within SGK, might want 90 off and 10 on, right? Whereas the enterprise model, maybe it's a little more stable, like I said, maybe a longer project horizon, probably going more back to that 80-20. And then another thing you mentioned, waterfall versus agile. So waterfall, again, might fall more typically an 80-20, 70-30 type of ratio. But with agile, I personally believe we should have a heavy onshore presence because agile is always changing. Projects can shift, you get into scrums, you're writing user stories. So I believe you need to be very near your business analysts, particularly in an agile workflow. And I was kind of laughing because I think Shriram he's nodding no, so he has a different opinion.
Yeah, meaning especially when you look at from the independent service vendors who are having more of a technology focus in their side, they have looked at, and especially as the exact point what you are talking about, being them as a profit center, their focus is to how well I can do with the lowest cost possible. So they have, they know that bringing an on-site is going to, make them feel a little jittery. So what they have done is that, yes, meaning it is not, I wouldn't say that 100% fully offshore, but the thing is that as they move along the project, they have moved it to 100%. They had some people coming on-site for the initial period of months to understand the business and how they operate, and then moved completely to offshore. But then in this case, the key aspect is that the client has to understand how the agile model works and how the sprint model works, and they need to have some kind of sprint master who actually runs the show from the on-site and as well as do the daily stand-up calls and things like that. So there are projects that being executed with the focus on agile with the 100% offshore.
So I probably just wouldn't do that. I mean, maybe it's my type project or my personal experience, but I think what Shriram and I can agree on is the flexibility of the team, that we've got a partnership going here where even in the middle of a project, we can shift. And I mean, recently this is real world, right? We said, gosh, we've got a bottleneck in testing. We probably could take a developer now and switch it to a test resource for a period of weeks or a month or two and get testing off bottleneck. And not always so easy on your side, on the vendor side, but you guys have done that for us. And that's what it takes, is this willingness to kind of morph the team to what the project needs at that point in time. Whether it's agile, waterfall, ISV, flexibility is king.
Right. I mean, honestly, I have always thought agile was a challenging model. A few years back, I personally wasn't even sure that agile can be executed offshore. And I'm learning, I'm sure a lot of people are as well, that it can be effectively executed offshore. But I think we are all trying to still figure out what is the correct team structure for an agile. How do you execute it in the best possible way? But let's move on. Shriram, I think Stephen talked about the scope of work, execution model, and these things do influence the structure of the team. But in your experience, how does the service provider structure the team? Can they always follow the guidelines Stephen was talking about, or are there other factors that influence the structuring of the team?
Yeah, I think when you start every interactions, when you start every engagement, you start with some specific structure that got you start with the first engagement. But then as you go along, you need to look at what you are doing and what you are planning to do and how things are, and it also depends on how many stakeholders you are working with on the client side. You'll also have to determine how your structure needs to be. You cannot just have one person to deal with the 10 different stakeholders, and you are inviting a failure there. So it is highly important on how the client is structuring various projects and how you are servicing, and it needs to be flexible enough to change the structure. I mean, it is, and then there cannot be one single structure would work on every project, and it is highly possible that within your organization, there is one group might have a different opinion than the other group, which means that you need to have a different kind of a structure and a model that you need to put in place. And I have some accounts where I have multiple project handbook is being used across different projects. It's not one single project handbook that is being used for the entire account.
Right, right.
Stephen, so far we talked about identifying the right service providers, setting the right kind of foundation, even identifying the correct team structures based on nature of assignment. But I'm sure that from a client's perspective, during that initial phase, there comes a time where you need to evaluate whether you have found the right service provider. How do you evaluate the performance of a service provider? Is there a specific point in the engagement where you conclude that yes, this is a partnership worth engaging in long term?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you're outside my organization, back in the larger business operations. It boils down to on time, on cost, or on time, on budget, right? They don't really want to get into all the metrics, but we have to evaluate our partners a little deeper. It's great that it's on time and on cost, but how much blood is on the floor at the end of that? How much calories have you expended managing the vendor to get on time and on budget? So kind of if you go a level deeper, we might look at productivity or utilization of the team. What percent utilized were we over the course of it? How were communications handled? Typically every project's got a dark hour when it looks like something's not going to happen, or a technical challenge hits the team on a Sunday night, something goes down. Well, you got to look back and say, well, how do we respond? Did we start attacking each other and we blamed the partner and the partner blamed us, or did we kind of gather forces as a team and sort of work on it together? And a hallmark of a strong team is not what you do when it's going well, it's what you do when it isn't going well. And like I said, every project seems to have some kind of dark hour, so I'd say that would be part of it. I think we talked a little bit about value addition. So at the back end of it, I would stop and think, all right, well, what did, in this case, Aspire bring to me during the project? Was there an ideas or something in the UI? Is something about the way we tested that I didn't tell them to do? They just came forward and said, hey, you know what, if we did it this way, it'd be better. So I would say that would be a great way for me to evaluate. And maybe the last thing is knowledge building in my partner's organization about my problems. Or at the end of the project, even if it's on time, on budget, do they still know about the same as they did when they started? Because I want to say, no, they know more, and so next time we do a project like this, we're going to be further ahead, right? I'd say that that's probably a good measuring stick for us on the IT side when you evaluate that partner.
Well, working through the dark hour, that's a very interesting concept. But Stephen, once you have concluded that this is the right kind of partner, you would like to create a long-term partnership with them. What kind of protocols do you set on the communication side, on the management side? What do you set to make this relationship more effective?
Well, it's probably going to depend on the back end of the last conversation. So whatever problems I'm having, when I start to evaluate on a project-by-project basis, I'm going to start trying to solve on the engagement basis. So one thing we do now is we try to have quarterly meetings with upper management. I've actually traveled to the offshore location on a couple of occasions and met with the CEO, try to see if there's some alignment there. It just takes more commitment. People think that outsourcing is just taking all your problems and throwing them to somebody else. It's not really true. It's really about figuring out which part of your problem is best solved and then partnering with them to help you solve it, right? It's not throwing it over the transom, as we say. So in terms of measurements, we hit some of the KPIs, the utilization and that kind of thing. I would really say it starts boiling down into upper level comfort and trust. And I got a little trust meter, and so I've got, in my head, I might have 6, 7, 8 projects that I know are coming down the road. And success means I'm thinking about which ones my partner is going to be able to help me tackle. That's all in my head, right? But that's the hallmark of success, is me sort of planning somewhere along my day of which new things my partner can help me tackle.
Good to have the trust meter that I can see for every client.
Yeah, right. Not always visible.
Right. Sriram, Stephen briefly touched on metrics, right? And from a service provider's perspective, obviously you need to keep building that trust. He talked about the trust meter. What do you do to keep building that trust that really lays the foundation for a long partnership?
Super, that's a great question. I don't want to touch upon the different metrics that are available in for us to track, but that is all these things are available in everywhere. Meaning it's called an objective metrics where you collect data and show various things. But one of the key aspects here is that being a vendor, you execute the project, and you are expected to have all these data and the metrics. I think it is not that you cannot just go and then find, oh, I'm going to now draw the metrics. No, it is your responsibility of having all these metrics.
It's a framework.
Yeah, right. It is. But one of the key aspects is when you work with a strategic partner, you need to make sure that the client doesn't have enough time and the effort to put on collecting this data from their side. So they are going to give the feedback as and when they see issues, as and when the events that are happening. So it is what I call that as more of a subjective feedback. So we need to collect these subjective feedback and try to map with the data what we collect internally on the objective area is what that makes the client look at it, because you can get a number of metrics from the data what you have seen, but what they are going to see is there are some specific event happening and relating, how am I relating to that. So that subjective feedback mapping with an objective metrics is one of the key aspects on building the trust, and that is and that has to come, that one of the key aspects that goes along with this is transparency. How are you being transparent on showing that data that yes, I have seen this event, yes, this happened, and that is how it's also impacted my data metrics that where I'm coming and showing it to you, rather than going and defending things.
Right.
That's very, very key on getting the trust.
That's right.
Well, mapping subjective feedback to objective metrics, I think that's a great point for discussion, Sriram. Hopefully a point for discussion for a further discussion. But once you've set the right foundation on the current assignments, and then you're providing the correct visibility, being flexible, open, from a service provider's perspective, what do you then do as a final step to make this relationship really strong and last for a long time?
Right. So the one of the key aspects is we talked about a lot of how open that vendor, client being with the partner. Right. Meaning it is highly important that we understand their business, we understand their long roadmap, and how am I ready to service them. So it is not that just they give us a project and we execute and we show it to them and we just sit idle. So it is, as you go along, we need to make sure that how well we are prepared to meet the client's needs. Meaning every client change their decisions based on the market condition. And we need to understand, we need to be in touch with them to make sure that what is their roadmap, and probably 2 years down the line, and this is what, that could be some changes coming in. So I need to be prepared well enough so that when they make that switch, I'm ready to make the switch as well. So it is not that there is a lag that I'm going to give it to them. Okay, so you made the switch, I need about 3 months time for me to make the switch. Meaning they're not going to wait for me. They're not going to, I'm not going to be there. They're going to go with somebody else. So it is, one of the key aspects is when you call me as a partner, and that is one of the key things. How am I going along with them? Meaning how am I being prepared myself on the knowledge, on the competency of the team, and that is one of the key. And it's kind of I have a vested interest on client success. So that's the way that I look at this here.
Sure. Stephen, Sriram talked about preemptive preparedness on the part of the service provider. Now, for them to really do that, they need to continue to be motivated. And from the client's perspective, what do you do to keep them motivated and keep fueling this partnership?
Yeah, well, I believe strongly that part of keeping my partner motivated in the space is opening them up to more than just the technical aspects of the project, right? So the part of offshore development and outsourced development that we are familiar with is things like technical architecture, which we use the term tarchitecture. And so that's your service strategy and which kind of platform and what kind of database and queuing and all the technical aspects of designing a solution, which of course are very important, but are kind of foundational, something we all expect. But there's another term, if any of you have read Luke Coleman's book, which talks about going beyond software architecture, there's another term called marketecture. And marketecture is how am I, the customer, marketing this product to my customers, and what's my value proposition. And I think involving your vendor in those types of discussion, really giving them insight into what you're trying to build as a business, is particularly for the onshore people a lot more interesting maybe than sitting in the 9th meeting about whether we're going to use Java or C to build something. That's great, but what's really going on? And then I think what helps with that is really a supply chain, right? It's me communicating to onshore. The onshore is going to maybe talk to a nighttime project manager who's going to talk to the offshore manager at night and the developers and testers. So how fluid is that communication mechanism, and can that offshore team begin to feel vested in creativity? And to somebody who's, as I mentioned earlier, developing or testing has an idea, will that actually make it back upstream and into the boardroom and say, we got this idea, let's consider this? Because once that happens, now you've really got something, right? You've got two separate organizations that true they had separate P&Ls, right? The offshore partner's trying to make a profit on offshore, and I'm trying to make my profit. But now we have a unified goal that we both want to deliver something interesting to either an external client or often for me internally, my operations. And if we're both working on that together and we're both successful, there's plenty of motivation there.
Right. Yeah, marketecture is a great terminology, a coin that we can, I hope everybody gets into that. I think it is one of the key aspects of building the strong partnership there.
Right. Stephen, Sriram, I think that was an interesting discussion. We covered the whole life cycle of a relationship building exercise. We talked about evaluating the relationship, identifying the right partner, strengthening the partnership. I think that has kindled some interest in the participants we have on the phone. So we have received a few very interesting questions. I think this might be a good time for us to move into the question and answer session. But while I quickly scan through the questions, we'll take a short 30-second break, and we'll run a quick poll. And for all the participants on the phone, you'll see a quick poll coming up on your screens. Please do take your time to respond to that, and we'll be back with some question answers in about 30 seconds or so. Okay, thanks everyone for participating, and we'll move on to some questions and answers. In fact, an interesting question that I see has come in is, how do you handle resource attrition in such a relationship? Sriram, I think it pertains more to the service provider, and we all understand that resource attrition is a big risk in the IT industry right now. So from a service provider perspective, how do you mitigate such a risk?
Right, that's a very great question, because this is something that we get all the time when we go out and look for some new opportunities. One of the key aspect is that both these the service provider need to understand that is the industry attrition here is about 8 to 15%. And how will you manage this whole execution with this attrition is where you can show the success. I mean, if you are not able to show the success of managing these projects with these kind of an attrition, then you are not going to be there and that will show you how many exits that you are happening with each of these projects that you are taking up. So it is a very key aspect is that when you want to work with the client, you understand their needs. You can bring in as much technology expertise as you want, meaning as you talk about the attrition, which means there are that much resources also available in the market, so you would be able to get in the required technology expertise. But the key aspect here is that how far you are able to address that business and the knowledge that you are gaining from that each of these clients. And that is where, how well you are able to build that gap if there is an attrition, and how well you are not impacting the client with that gap is extremely important. And there are situations where, the client might have a strong, deadlines and a strong project commitment at a specific period of time, and you need to make sure that you are proactively aware of that and try to build some kind of a resource backup so that you know that this is something you need to address and address those risks well in advance rather than waiting for it to happen. So, that is what I would say is one of the key aspects, managing knowledge, either documentations or putting some backup or ensuring that, these resources are being there, for a period of time. So that's the key here.
Stephen, in your experience, have you really been impacted by resource attrition on a service provider side, or is that something a client should really worry about?
It was definitely a worry, and I think it also depends on the country with which you're sourcing your offshore. If you were to look at the metrics in Bangladesh or China or India or Brazil, you'll find different rates of attrition in different countries. A lot of it is timing. If you're early in the project and you lose somebody, typically you may not even know. We might ask you to just tell us so we know the names of the people on the project. But I think more often it wouldn't be a big deal. If you happen to be unlucky and you're in 3 days, that last part we were doing some UAT, and the minute the problem is found in UAT, you've got to quickly get it in development and test. It's a serious concern. I know we've talked with Aspire before, and you guys have put a shadow resource on so that somebody was trained up and ready to go, and I think that's helped mitigate. But I know in our projects we have had some trouble with attrition. I think part of it's been how you guys have responded to it. That might be one of those dark hours we talked about, right? We're trying to deliver, and I think at one point, unfortunately, we actually had an employee that had an automobile accident. And it's how quickly can the team stitch together and find the resources to keep the project on track. And in this case, we were able to deliver, but got a little, we took a few deep breaths for a while.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen. I think we are almost at the top of the hour, so I think it's time for us to wind up. But before we do that, Stephen, any closing comments, any other points of insight for our participants on the phone?
Yeah, I guess the point of the whole hour really is I believe to be successful when you're procuring an offshore relationship is to be looking for a partner. You may need a vendor for a project right away, but in the long run, if you want to be successful with it, it's just like anything else. You get out of it what you put into it. And so if you want a partner, be a partner. That's the key thing. You have to provide information and insight and transparency and trust if you want all those things back. And I've found that I've put a lot of time into the relationship, and I've gotten a result. I've gotten something I can rely on and I can deliver to my operations because I put that time in.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you. And thanks, Sriram. On behalf of Stephen and Sriram, I would like to thank all our participants on the phone. And I know there were a few other interesting questions that we didn't manage to get through in this 1 hour, but do look forward to some email communication from us, and we'll get answers to those questions from our panelists. Once again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this webinar today, and have a good day. Bye.